What am I saying?
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be just. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi. One money, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Hello.
Hey.
Can I ask, Mr. Ojo or Dr. Ojo, is he still coming?
No.
Okay.
So yes. I thought I mentioned I probably.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi. Man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi. Man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
LSA, can you hear us?
Cannot share
screen while they are sharing. That makes sense. LSA, are you there? I think we just have to wait. Thank you. Uti, do you want to try your slides?
Theophilus, you're doing so?
So now we can, because LSA have stopped sharing their screen. So if you go, you know how to do it, right? The green thing at the bottom. Do you want to try?
Yes, I could do it.
Let's just see if it all works.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, you can start, and everybody has been allowed to be able to share their slides.
Thank you. Who are we talking to?
My name is Samuel.
Thank you, Samuel. Are you our host? Are you in charge of us?
Yes.
Thank you very much for setting it up.
You're welcome, ma'am.
We're just going to try they're just going to try out their slides now.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Uti, you can go ahead and try. Yes. Something's happening. Good. You're all set. Theophilus, do you want to try yours? All good. Very good. Naza?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, he's still doing. Oh, that looks interesting. I want to see it. Very good. Everything's functional. Do you want to, let's see how many attendees we have. We have 4 attendees. So I think we'll wait a little while if you can bear it. It is LSA, Samuel. We are not live streaming, is that right? We are recording, but not live streaming. Ah, Rejoice.
Yes, we're going to be live streaming in some minutes.
All right. And so that will go straight onto the Facebook page.
Yes, it would. Yes,
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Are you happy with that, speakers? Okay, people are joining. We've started streaming. So I'll just start a formal welcome to everyone. Welcome everyone to session 9J of Lagos Studies. We are in the last hours now of the conference. It's been totally fantastic as always. The writing workshop terminated this morning. Well, not terminated, that's the wrong word. Closed. And now we're just attending the last few sessions together with everyone else. So welcome to the speakers, welcome to the audience. This is the second of 2 linked panels organized by the Tejumola Olaniyan Reading Group and Olaniyan Legacy Project. Today's, the title of this panel today is Crisis as Norm, African Popular Cultural Studies and Global Conditions of Being. The 3 speakers are, am I right? Did you all train at Unilag? I know Theophilus trained at Unilag. Uti, where did you do undergraduate? Ibadan.
Sorry, I was mute. University of Uyo, Akwa Ibom State.
Okay. And Chinaza, you were also Unilag. Yes. So we are streaming into home for the 2 gents. So I will introduce the speakers briefly, and then we will just follow the order on the program. One of our speakers is not here today. So the first speaker will be Tejumola Olaniyan from the University of California, Riverside. And her paper has the wonderful title, Wahala Daylight Wetin, Theorizing Crisis Beyond the Norm in Nigerian Literature and Mediascapes. And then after that, let me introduce the speakers as we go, shall I? So Uti, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Carly, for helping us put together this panel where we're thinking about global conditions of being as it interacts with African popular culture. I will share my screen. So the title of my paper is...
Sorry, Uti, can you go into slide mode? So we only see the slide on the screen. Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
The thing about slide mode, Carly, it's not letting me see my notes, so I might have to stay in the other.
That is no problem then. No problem. Sorry to have bothered you then. Just go back to what you had before.
Okay. So the title of my paper is Wahala Daylight Nothing, Theorizing Crisis Beyond the Norm in Nigerian Literature and Literary and Media. So what this paper attempts to do is to think through how the idea of wahala, which I'm using as a critical filter, actually intersects with the kinds of ethos that we see in Soyinka's novel, Chronicles from the Land of the Happiest People on Earth, and how this also helps us to understand the kinds of textual productions, popular culture that cohere around the idea of wahala as a concept. So let us begin from a narrative moment in Wole Soyinka's recently published novel, Chronicles from the Land of the Happiest People on Earth. This moment provides us with the conceptual hinge from which one can begin to theorize the idea of crisis as lived experience differently within the Nigerian post-colony. It is a scene particularly interesting for its being the extracted segment of the novel. So publicity by its publishers, this was the segment that was extracted as the publicity material. And I would summarize this scene very briefly. And as the novel describes it as a street eruption scene. And we see a group of people rushing towards a spot of attraction, men and women, all kinds of characters rushing towards the scene of attraction in the novel. And what follows is a description, and in gruesome detail, this is something we see in Soyinka's novel, of the lynching of a Lasma traffic warden, attacked by the crowd as a scapegoat for ostensibly causing a fatal traffic accident. The details are chilling enough, but the narrator's description of the killing frenzy as an insignia of the transfiguration of a collective psyche is particularly revelatory. Reflecting on this textual moment later, one of the characters, Duole, says, something is broken beyond race, outside color or history. Something has cracked, can't be put back together. So this scene that I'm referencing in Soyinka's novel, I'm arguing that this scene helps us to see how the idea of crisis can be thought of differently. So Soyinka's novel, Chronicles of from the Land of the Happiest People on Earth, has been addressed by critics, different kinds of responses, some of them laudatory and others not quite. So during the brief time that I have in this presentation, what I intend to do is to show, one, how the idea of wahala as norm functions as a signifier of crisis, but not just crisis in the normal everyday sense of the term, but crisis as a very particular aspect of Nigerian experience. I will also show how agentic action and social contingencies intersect in our understanding of crisis. And then lastly, how the idea of perspective is important if we were to use wahala as norm as a structuring idiom for understanding adverse social life and experience in Nigeria. And Kali, please, when I have like 5 minutes, could you indicate? Thank you. So my reading of Chronicles traces the intersection between spatial logic, subjectivity, and the constitution of textual meaning in the novel, demonstrating the connection between political instability and the fabric of social life as it operates at the juncture of state power and lived experience. Tracing the ramifications of the idea of wahala as a critical filter for reading both Soyinka's novel and aspects of popular culture that express a similar ethos helps us to see and to show its function as, again, a signifier of what I term to be a very peculiar kind of our mode of understanding of the term crisis. What these texts push us to do is that they prompt us to reconsider the conceptual and analytic vocabulary that we have for theorizing crisis beyond the norm from the context of Nigerian literature and mediascapes. Put differently, this moment pushes us to rethink how we engage with forms of cultural production that emerge as a response to the normalization of crisis as lived experience in a society where the abnormality and brokenness of things is taken for granted. If, as Duole states, something is broken in a society that cannot be put back together, I ask, how can we make sense of the forms of cultural production that emerge from the debris of such brokenness in ways that engage both the playful, the serious, and the generative dimensions of crisis? The Protean implication of wahala as norm not only illuminates the strivings that subjects express in the context of Nigerian life against a protracted historical and experiential condition of crisis, but it also suggests a way in which this term redefines the very notion of crisis itself. And to take a very brief step back, the concept of wahala suffuses Nigerian social media, cultural production, and literature. Lots of movies and novels, plays have engaged with this concept in one way or the other. However, in spite of the dominance, I would say, of this kind of idiom within the Nigerian literature and cultural and media spaces, the use of it almost as a metonym for expressing disquiet social unease, scholarly attention to the term often takes it for granted. The concept is often referenced in a way that leaves it untheorized, and it is often taken for granted in that sense. However, what I'm arguing is that an inquiry into the idea of wahala is relevant if we're to understand what has been called the permanent crisis of stagnated development and uncertainty that has come to define the Nigerian polity. So what is at stake for the critical implications of Wahala as norm as a signifying metonym? What is at stake? Why do we need to understand how this concept plays out in the text we are reading? I argue that this focal point gives us room to question the kinds of work that the term is or is not doing. The phrase Wahala dey like bicycle, which was a popular almost idiom, 2020, this was all over the place in Nigerian social media. This phrase, I argue, names a catalytic template, a starting point from which we can think about the narrativization of adversity in the Nigerian social imaginary as a layered, labeled, and embodied production of contradictions that unsettle simplistic understandings of crisis. Wahala as norm, therefore, offers us a suggestive conceptual key for understanding how narrativizations of crisis, on the one hand, provides insight into the normalization of crisis as everyday reality, on the other hand. So I borrow some of my theoretical frames from Tejumola Olaniyan's text, Arrest the Music, where he describes the scene of the post-colonial incredible, the condition which, according to him, is condition of being conceived as that which cannot be believed, that which is too improbable, astonishing, and extraordinary to be believed. For Olaniyan, the incredible is not simply a breach, but an outlanding infraction of normality and its limits. It articulates a social context bereft of all, and here I'm quoting, underwrites the certainty, all that underwrites the certainty and tangibility of institutions and practice of social exchange. In the glimpse of the post-colonial incredible, which we see in the scene that I described earlier, all props of stability, normality, and intelligibility are dissolved, and thus engendering social and symbolic crisis. So this is one of those scenes that is described in the novel where, and anyone who has spent time in Nigerian urban spaces, even rural spaces, is familiar with this, and there's always something going down somewhere, even to the point that it's often said, if you see people running, there is no point to even ask what's going on. All you need to do is run. So it is important to note that Olaniyan theorizes the context of crisis as represented, and he's reading Fela's work. He theorizes it as an interregnum, and an interregnum is this, by definition, is a period where normal government is suspended. So it is a temporal moment between two other distinct temporal moments. Although Olaniyan uses the term crisis as norm to mark this period, this interregnum, what gets the sense of crisis that he conceives as that which is a temporal interlude, that which increasingly, I'm quoting here, increasingly threatens to become the norm. Understood as an interim, the idea of an interregnum suggests a temporal interval beyond which lies an imaginable horizon of restoration of normality and the consolidation of institutions for the maintenance of social stability. However, I am problematizing the way in which Soyinka's text and the text that I read in the larger project from Nigerian media and cultural scapes presents our understanding of crisis as being beyond merely the temporal. So I'm asking, to what extent can thinking crisis through the idea of Wahala help us to see a different notion of crisis that is beyond merely that of a temporal rupture, a turning point, but more an embodied, existential, continuous period of unease. Going back to Soyinka's novel, what we also see is moments in the text where this idea becomes prevalent. So at the opening scene of the novel, the character tells his name is Papa Davina, and he's presented as this mysterious spiritual figure who is the see all, know all, and knows all the underbelly of this city. So he tells the character, move to that window, draw back the curtain, and look through. It is possible to see or to understand this moment where we are told to, where the character tells his visitor to look through the window, almost as if Soyinka is inviting us, drawing the textual curtain, as it were, on a society, and inviting us to take a look at what is actually happening. And it is through his description of space, through his description of the characters, the subjectivity of the characters, and the attempts in which the efforts which they invest to transcend crisis, that we begin to understand Soyinka's projects in this text. So this moment, this textual moment in Chronicles, allow us a vantage point to understand subject improvisations within the domains of the unforeseen and unexpected. And also it spotlights the ways in which contemporary Nigerian literature represents the grounds of crisis, enabling us to rethink conditions of possibility from which a contextually based understanding of crisis is produced. And here I'm referencing Tisi Jaji's view of a parochial reading, where local context is understood as the center of its own world that generates its own theories. So I will conclude. I go to a much more extensive detail to show how Soyinka novel does this work and how other moments in Nigerian literature and culturescapes help us to understand the argument that I'm making here. But in conclusion, in a world of profound unpredictability, where one's position and range of possibilities are constantly shifting and unstable, and subjects are occupied with constantly seeking to predict and move in relation to social stimuli, Chronicles demonstrates the extent to which agentic action must be seen as motion within motion, fueled by the juxtaposition of both the existential unsettlement of crisis on the one hand and the potentials for agency that subjects can insist on accruing to themselves. This is the attempt to romanticize crisis by imagining it as a simplistic understanding of, a simplistic index of creativity. Rather, reading Soyinka's novel through the Wahala paradigm, I am suggesting, shows us a way of theorizing adversity differently as it takes place in forms of everyday life. What I foreground is the critical urgency to negate the displacement of African agency in understanding of the norm of crisis and adversity, and the imperative to interrogate the there of generalized normative frame of crisis with the here of the context of Wahala. And in doing so, this reading will help us to understand how context illuminates meaning, and how rapid change, volatility as they unfold help us to see the attempts by subjects to manage the brutality of everyday life. And lastly, the Wahala day like bicycle metaphor, it's in its interweaving of everyday manifestations of the familiar and the unfamiliar notions of crisis, helps us or invites us to contextualize the nature, form, implication, and consequences of the condition of social unease that all these texts signify. I will stop here, and thank you very much.
Beautiful, Uti. And I'm struck by the fact that your argument is a bit like a bicycle. It takes unlike elements, combines them, and then this machine starts to work, and it starts to generate meanings as you go along. It's also really exciting to have such an early reading of this novel, which I don't believe has received critical attention. So I don't know how much time you have off from your thesis, or your thesis is finished.
No, I'm still in
No.
the process of writing it.
So maybe your supervisor will not thank me, but I think if you can get that out as an article, that would be really exciting. Thank you very much for a beautiful presentation. We will move now to the second speaker, Theophilus Okunlola, Bodies in Crisis, Disabled Colony, Debilitated Post-Colonies. We saw the slides briefly. I can't wait to see the presentation. Welcome, sir. Please share your slides.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Very well.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Carly, and everyone on the panel. So as you can see, I've changed the topic a bit, and I think it's something with the academia. When you are first thinking about an idea, you seem to have a topic, but at a point, probably halfway into the draft, you realize, well, that wouldn't work. So this is just the topic is just as open as that. So I'll go straight into the presentation now. Permit me, I'm reading from 2 screens. So in case I'm not looking directly here, yeah, that's the reason. Thanks. So 2 objectives animate my discussion here. The first is an attempt to think about crisis as a moment of absolute rupture by paying attention to the material realities of bodies that emerge from such a moment of rupture. In this sense, while I acknowledge that the trope of crisis as norm, or what Olaniyan calls the post-colonial incredible, can be an everyday experience in which, quote, I'm quoting Olaniyan now, all props of stability, normality, and intelligibility are dissolved. I also want to think about the post-colonial incredible as an event, a momentous marker in the experience and the making of a post-colonial African state. The second objective that animates this presentation here is to use the post-colonial incredible as a moment of rupture to write a cultural biography of a post-colonial African state. It is in following these 2 objectives that I concentrate on bodies in crisis, specifically disabled bodies. The interest is to attend to how the post-colonial incredible produces and shapes disability, and how disability also represents what crisis as a moment of rupture and as an afterlife of an event that keeps writing and rewriting the biography of the post-colonial state. For example, let us think about decapitated bodies, trailing wars, genocides in places like Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Ethiopia, those bodies trailing terrorist attacks in northern Nigeria. These disabled bodies are not only part of a narrative of the past of that post-colonial state, but of the present and the future. In thinking about these disabled subjects, their histories, memories, and experiences, it can be argued explicitly that disabled subjects most profoundly reflect the post-colonial states because they are product of crisis and forms of capacity that the post-colonial state generates when emerging from crisis. Ironically, disabled bodies are arguably the most overlooked subjects in African cultural criticism. So therefore, if we must understand and define crisis, the post-colonial incredible in Africa, we must really look at disabled subjects across the colonial and post-colonial histories of African crisis. At the same time, if we are to write a cultural and political biography of the post-colonial states, to follow again the footsteps of Tejumola Olaniyan, we must start from the disabled subjects of the post-colony. So in the rest of this paper, I will be turning my attention to few representations of disability in Angola. And I will say the reasons for Angola as I proceed. But I'll be turning my attention to representations of disability in Angola as the nation emerged from this moment of rupture, this moment of the post-colonial incredible, after almost 3 decades of civil war crisis. I'll be using cultural productions to do two things. The first is to observe how disability is presented as an aftermath of crisis. And the second is to attempt to chart a cultural and political biography of post-colonial Angola from disabled subjects that emerge in these cultural productions. All right. Oh. Okay, sorry. So in 1995, when Angola was still in the throes of civil war, an estimated 20% of 12 million population had disabilities. In 2011, 9 years after the civil war, an estimated, and this figure is actually conservative, the one I'm about to say now, an estimated 500,000 people of about 20 million had disabilities. A more recent report by the United Nations, 2019 actually, puts the figure of disabled subjects in Angola to 656,000 out of a population of 27 million people. So from 1995 till date, 75% of the people with disabilities in Angola are casualties of landmines explosion. Okay, so landmines laid during the Civil War affected the soldiers during the war, but those landmines remained active decades after the Civil War and continued to injure and kill civilian populations in Angola. Therefore, to think about disabilities in Angola is to pay attention to literally explosive pasts and haunted landscapes that are afterlives of civil war crisis. So several landscapes are still being demined. A rough figure that was given, I've been studying, and this is outside, but the rough figure I've seen, to use Carly's work in trying to walk the streets of this research I've been doing is, I've been following organizations that have been involved in demining Angola. They said there are still about 1 million active landmines in Angola till now. So that tells us just the issue. So as I said, the afterlife of the Civil War crisis is to pay attention to the explosive past, haunted landscapes. Now, several landscapes in Angola are still being demined, and these landscapes have their cultural and political identity. These landmines are from countries like Portugal, the then Soviet Union, Cuba, South Africa, East Germany. And of the 37 different varieties of landmines that are currently in Angola, 7 of them are actually produced in the United States. So, outside human subjects, Angola's haunted landscapes and landmines chart the political biography of Angola itself. They tell the stories of the nation's war of decolonization, multiple alignments during the Cold War, and fractured politics that prolonged the civil war in Angola. At the same time, the case of the landmines in Angola is insightful in allowing us to think about how disability can be generationally produced in Africa. Several children born after the civil war in Angola have had to be amputated because they accidentally stepped on landmines. The children in this category have become victims of the afterlives of a crisis they never saw. In their own way, they will have to articulate a post-colonial moment they never experienced, but for which they have an embodied evidence. The generational production of disability is part of the political biography of post-colonial Angola, where the post-colonial incredible continuously produces and rewrites itself on different generations. Lots of attentions have been devoted to representing the experience of landmine victims in Angola. At the end of the civil war in Angola, Princess Diana was at the forefront of the campaign of demining Angola by focusing attention on the plight of landmine victims. In 1997, when she visited Angola, she went to a rehabilitation center where victims were given prosthetics and were taught how to walk again. And there's no time, but that phrase, how to walk again, is very significant in thinking about disability and the post-colony. But part of the people she met was Sandra Thijika. Now that's Sandra Thijika, the young lady sitting beside Princess Diana in the picture. Then she was a 13-year-old. Prince Harry followed the president of his mother, and in 2019, 22 years after his mother visited Angola, Prince Harry also visits the same center and met Sandra again. So these pictures are Princess Diana meeting Sandra Thijika, and this is Prince Harry meeting the same lady 22 years after. Okay. Well, Prince Harry, from Princess Diana to Prince Harry, the royal visitors from Britain have changed, but Sandra Thijika remains the same. Importantly, she straddles the generation of those who experienced the war and bear its bruises, and those who did not, but still suffer from its aftermath. In addition, these images with Sandra also foreground a political moment in Angola. It suggests Sandra has become an embodiment of British advocacy for demanding Angola. Diana's picture with Sandra is one of the most significant images that archives the involvement and the contribution of the princess and Britain to the transition process in Angola, what Olaniyan refers to as interregnum. Placed within the post-Cold War global conflict context, Diana, coming from Britain, represented a Western ideological position with its emphasis on freedom, democracy, capitalism. Conversely, the Angolan government that was just being formed at the time practiced a socialist government driven by a Marxist-Leninist ideology. Thus, positioning herself as an advocate of the victims of landmines in Angola is an attempt to care for victims, no doubt, but it was also a way to market Western political ideologies directly to disabled victims of the Angolan civil war. The image and the advocacy of Diana in 1997 might be read as a demonstration of British and by extension, Western soft power that had influenced the production of several literary and cultural production from Africa during the period of the Cold War. Diana and Sandra's images then serve to represent how aftermath of crisis within post-colonial Africa have transnational colorations and can be exploited within international political contexts. Through disability, therefore, the post-colonial incredible is made to transcend the post-colony and for it to become a site where local and international politics commingle in the aftermath of crisis. So I'll leave us with one last image. And this image was, This image was that of a beauty pageant organized in 2008, as you can see, called Miss Landmine. And it is becoming quite a popular thing now. One was done in Cambodia, and there's a documentary about Miss Landmine in Cambodia. And this was the one done in Angola. And as you can see, these are representations of people, most of them, of course, ladies, who have been affected by the explosion. How does thinking about this kind of image complicate how we think about a moment of rupture and the post-colonial incredible? So I'll conclude by saying this is just part of a larger project, my dissertation, where I concentrate on both human and non-human subjects and how that frame I will think about crisis. And that's why you see I spoke a lot about mines in Africa. But these are landmines queens, as one can think about it. And it brings the question of the aftermath of crisis and the artifacts of disability in African cultural production. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theophilus. Just wonderful. And I mean, it's particularly wonderful for me, someone who's known you for many years, to see how your ideas have evolved. You know, when you've been watching someone for a while, to see what complicated things you are doing with memory studies, with trauma studies. I'm really very proud. That's fantastic. Just a quick one. I can save it for question time, but I'll tell you now, then you can think about it at question time. Also, that image of which prince is that? Is that one Harry? So Harry revisiting the scene of his mother whose body is broken, and then it becomes it kind of steals that moment again for empire. I mean, I think you begin to make that argument.
One question, sorry. I actually skipped all of those in my presentation. I do want to go into that.
I'm sure you were. Yeah. That's fantastic. Okay, so save that for question time. Thank you very much. The last speaker today is Chinaza Okoli, Crisis as Performance, Popular Protest and the Critical Public Sphere. Please go ahead, Naza.
Right. Can you all hear me? Great. So yeah, thank you all for having me. And my topic is Crisis as Performance, Queerness and Nigeria's EndSARS protest. So this is my attempt to understand the popular EndSARS. And of course, Lagos is the home of that protest, and it's very fitting that I'm talking about this at the LSA conference. One of the most widely circulated media during the EndSARS protests in Nigeria was a 12-second video, which first appeared on Twitter on the 10th of October, 2020. In the video, LGBTQ activist Matthew Blaze, walking with other protesters in Lagos, yells, "Queer lives matter," multiple times. For many, this was a strange cry. It certainly differed from the stated goal of the protest, namely an end to police brutality. Online and offline, critics condemned this hijack of the protest by a small group on the fringe, intent on pushing their own agenda. Others announced that while they were generally sympathetic to the LGBTQ cause, it was unwise, unsafe, in fact, to accommodate their concerns at this time. In short, while queer lives, of course, mattered, they argued, this was neither the right time nor place. Yet Blaze's assertion was not the only dissonant element of the video. Blaze, who's openly gay and identifies as non-binary, is dressed in a black crop top. Their shrill voice accentuated by gutsy waves of the hand. In a country where homosexual relationships are illegal and violence against LGBTQ persons is normalized, Blaze's performance, their self-presentation and acknowledgement of the humanity of queer lives is disruptive. This moment of rupture, I say we've repeated this phrase multiple times today. This dissonance, in fact, represents what social movement scholars understand as the capacity of protest performances to embody different meanings and identities. As Jeffrey S. Juris, for example, puts it, social movements are, quote, sites of cultural contestation and meaning production in the context of ongoing political struggle and dialogical interaction, end of quote. As a space for cultural contestation, public protests are not merely conceived as a reaction against political oppression. They also serve to dramatize the conflicting interests within the movement itself. Popular protests of this nature are thus cultural texts. And as Jeffrey Alexander has noted, quote, cultural texts are performed so that meanings can be displayed to others, end of quote. I would like to further complicate this moment of disruption by considering Tejumola Olaniyan's theorization on post-colonial crisis as artistic expression, offering the imperative arrest the music as a conceptual key. Where was that? Offering the imperative arrest the music as a conceptual key for understanding, quote, the relations between art, specifically oppositional music, and a post-colonial African state, end of quote. Olaniyan argues that Fela's music confronts the, quote, post-colonial incredible, or, quote, crisis as norm of the Nigerian state through the contradictory but complementary modes of sustenance, quote, and transcendence. The command arrests the music, thus articulates the conflict between art and the crisis of the post-colonial state. But it also frames art as an elusive subject, resilient in the face of government clampdown. Like oppositional art, public protest taunts and tests the limits and oftentimes unfairness of the law. Confident in its ability to prevail, it sustains chaos by momentarily flouting government regulation, for example, by mounting roadblocks, picketing public buildings, and so on. At the same time, it transcends this state through performances of joy, agency, and freedom. For queer protesters, NSARS also represented a moment of self-definition, an existential and philosophical interrogation of gender norms. As Olaniyan again observes, the crisis of the post-colonial state is, quote, as much social as epistemological, end of quote. For these activists, this protest was not merely a confrontation with crisis as norm, but a crisis of the norm. That is, the crisis of defining that which constitutes the norm, pitting themselves against the government, but also co-protesters, where activists rehearsed their double marginal status, while also using the opportunity to invite audiences to participate in the epistemological performance. There is the task of reconsidering conventional definitions of normalcy. Unlike NSARS, the chant, Queer Lives Matter, is a declaration, statement of fact, but also one that invites debate. In multiple tweets and press interviews, queer activists theorized about the interconnections among LGBTQ advocacy, the campaign for police reforms, and other issues being pushed by the protesters, including human rights, freedom of the press, electoral reforms, and so on. For example, speaking to HuffPost, protester Freddie Jacob said, if we are fighting for a Nigeria for everybody, queer lives must matter in that. Discussing what she calls the urgency of Queer Lives Matter, linguist and scholar Uju Anya points out that SARS also targets LGBTQ to gain support and legitimacy. It's unbelievably dangerous and courageous to shout this outside and in a crowd, end of quote. In his study of queer activism on Nigerian Twitter, Paul Onanuga argues that the digital space has afforded gay people in Nigeria an alternative platform to nurture a robust community away from state surveillance and terror. As he finds, Twitter is especially effective because it offers the dual benefits of virtual distance and active engagement, making it possible for queer users to be, quote, anonymous if they choose to be, confidently express themselves, link up with other people of queer orientation, and make advocacies for acceptance, end of quote. Yet, as NSARS demonstrates, the physical public sphere is particularly an effective way of concretizing what might often seem like a vague or abstract reality. Has often pointed out, same-sex relationships have had a long history in many African communities are tacitly acknowledged. Indeed, part of why such relationships have recently come under intense scrutiny in many countries is the growing awareness surrounding LGBTQ rights and persons across the globe, development that has encouraged members of the community in many parts of the world to emerge in the open and gain access to mainstream spaces. Nevertheless, according to Mark Tedaki, there is a difference between the existence of a crisis, acknowledgement or construction of that crisis, end of quote. Therefore, while digital spaces have been helpful in fostering a vibrant queer community, the participation of queer activists in the NSAS protests, their insistence that their voices be heard, marked an important point in the crisis. So in closing, I want to highlight some of the additional thoughts just to signpost the rest of what the rest of the project will address. I note that Queer Lives Matter is a nod toward the Black Lives Matter movement. And I would like to think about the kind of interculturality signaled by the choice of this phrase. I'm also thinking of the community that Twitter fosters. In this tweet I cited earlier by Julia, she talks of the danger and courage that it takes to shout "Queer Lives Matter" outside in a crowd. And I think there is much to be said about the connections between the physicality of the protest and the virtual community. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Another wonderful presentation. In the panel I chaired with journal editors, I asked them each what was their dream article they would like to receive. But if someone asked me my dream panel, this would be it. PhD students presenting work from their doctoral theses and making really located and smart presentations that show awareness of all sorts of intellectual traditions. You've all done very well. I'm very pleased. So we're going to turn now. Oh, we've lost Theophilus for a minute, but we are now going to turn to questions. Maybe I can invite the audience to type your questions. Unfortunately, you can't interact with us, but you can type your comments. While people are thinking of comments and questions, I will just point out the links that I see between today's panel and yesterday's panel. And I think the body is such an important link. So not so much in your presentation today, Uti, but sorry, what is LSA saying? They can, let's see. Oh, there's a long comment.
I think they're saying if you want members of the audience to actually vocalize their question, that is also possible.
All right. Thank you, Samuel. We may ask you for that. So Uti, you can think of that of a response to that question in the meantime. But I just wanted to make you aware, because you're all also peers of each other. There's something really interesting about the body in the group. Tolu yesterday was talking about Fela's breath, but I hadn't heard him speak about that before, about the breath of playing the saxophone, but also the breath of being constrained. And Naza and Theophilus, both of you are talking in very interesting ways of constraints on the body or the freedom of the body. But then at the same time, you are also talking about the internet and how the internet enables things that physically we are not able to do. I guess as Zoom is doing for us now too. We are here together virtually to talk about embodied presence. So I will keep my eye on the chat to see if there are more questions coming from the audience. Uti, do you want to go, since there was a question directed at you? Please go ahead.
Yeah, so Luan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you very much for that question. And yes, the point that you make about how Wahala as norm relates to the larger thinking of crisis as a social global condition of being is a very important one. And also Walter Benjamin's view of the state of emergency as not just the exception, but the rule. And that is something that I'm attempting to explore, not just in this paper, but in my larger project, because there is, and this is a subject that has been discussed ad nauseum, the superimpositions of, concepts, ideas, theories that have their origins from different contexts, very different European and otherwise contexts that are, at a remove from Africa, used as the basis, as a frame for examining African realities. And scholars have made the point already that is this disjuncture that, inhibits our understanding of this African context, especially the work in which they are doing. So yes, what I'm suggesting here is that, and I think it's in tandem with what James Yeku has looked at in his work, thinking about a creative non-elite aesthetics. And Stephanie Newell and Onokome have also spoken about the epitome of the street. So what I'm suggesting here is that thinking about Wahala as norm can help us see how, this idea of the post-colonial incredible that we've been all engaging is marked on particular places. So how does the incredible look like when it marks itself on the landscape? Theophilus was speaking about how it marks itself on the body, and Chinaza was talking about how it's an eruption that attempts to intervene in discourses that seem to be exclusive. Right. So my point is that thinking about Wahala as a frame helps us to move beyond normative understandings of crisis, because Wahala as a term, and this point is important, is not just debilitating. It's not just restricting. There's a playful dimension to it. And this was something that my attention was drawn to in a previous panel. There's an agentic dimension to it and all these other dimensions. So thinking about Wahala, and the point also should be clear that I am not subsuming Wahala as merely crisis. I'm saying that using this frame helps us to think about crisis differently, as it is evident in Soyinka's novel, but also in these instances of cultural production like the Wahala Day, like bicycle slang, the different music videos that celebrate Wahala almost as an agentic measure for intervening in public control and political oppression. So yes, Walter Benjamin, but what would Walter Benjamin say of the state of emergency if he lived in Lagos? Those are the kinds of questions that I'm trying to ask. Thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Beautiful answer. Thank you very much. So there's a question from Femi. I think the pronunciation would be Dunmade. Is that correct? A comment. And then there's also a question for you, Theophilus, in the chat. So would you have a look at that and you can prepare an answer? Does someone want to respond to Femi? It's not really a question, I think. I think it's probably for you, Uti, because it's talking about Soyinka's earlier work.
I cannot see the question. But...
So it is in the Q&A. If you click on Q&A at the bottom.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
there are questions coming in different places.
Preoccupations that are in his earlier works actually consummate the obsession with cannibalism. Yes. Dr. is my teacher, my mentor, my friend, and I am so excited that he was able to make out time to attend this panel. Thank you very much for coming there. Yes, so with regards to Soyinka's wider work, and this is something that the project also examines, this idea of the different moments of crisis and the attempts by different subjects to try to manage it in various ways is something that infuses the whole of Soyinka's over. So whether you're looking at the tussle between tradition and modernity in Death and the King's Horseman, whether you're looking at attempts to re-narrate the post-colony by those who have been kind of distanced from it in the interpreters, whether you're looking at, the political emergence of Nigeria as a nation in Dance of the Forest. So this idea of crisis has always been there in Soyinka's work. And it's not far-fetched how this happens, because his patron saint, Ogun, is a very, very animate, figure whose arrival in every scene is often, assured to set things in motion and cause drastic change and action. So, but what we see, and this is the argument that I make very, very quickly, in Chronicles is the work of an artist who is at the end of his tether. Again, the point of something being broken. So what happens in a context where there have been all these attempts to try to rewrite the post-colony, try to intervene, try to push forward Olaniyan's idea of the norm as crisis as that which attempts to take over the norm. But it's been unsuccessful, and now crisis is the norm. How do we make sense of that? How do we narrate it? How do we come to terms with it? What is at stake for our understanding of it? These are the kinds of questions that I attempt to address in my work. But thank you very much for your question.
Sorry, yes, Prof. Dunmade, it's not, one can't see who people are. My apologies for just calling you by your first name. So let us, I see there's a very nice question for Chinaza as well. So you can each take a turn. Theophilus, are you ready to go to respond to your question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, so full disclosure also, Dr. Dumadi was not only UT's teacher, he was also my teacher and a mentor too, actually, Investor Villorin. And we still talk very much so. So thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you for attending. Yes, that's really lovely.
Yes. Okay. So I think I should start with your question, Carly, or what you were trying to push me toward thinking about. The two images. Actually, in my presentation, the parts I did not talk about, I actually analyzed Sandra herself, the lady, as like a timestamp that the British Empire is using to rewrite itself. And that goes back into my own consideration of the post-colonial incredible as a moment of rupture that continues to write itself. So to think about crisis, again, my argument is, yes, crisis as norm, but beyond crisis as norm, I'm thinking about those sudden moments that continue to rewrite themselves, not different types of everyday crisis, but for example, the Civil War, how the Civil War continues to rewrite itself, and it rewrites itself through the influence of the empire, essentially. So I consider that. And yeah, thinking as a person, a timestamp, because the question I asked while I was looking at the image, and many other images away, it is what interest in Sandra. So I dug up a lot of writings when Princess Diana visited the first time, The Guardian, I think BBC too, about British publications. And one of the things that me, and again, Carly, to just prove that you are absolutely spot on the analysis, the way they reported it, Sandra became very crucial because Princess Diana wept when she saw her in the first encounter. So in fact, in 2019, when Prince Harry went back, I think it was The Guardian, the way the headline was framed was Prince Harry meets the young girl who made Princess Diana weep. It was, I don't know how to, I was just, okay, is that what is going on here? And to then take the work further, because I also don't want to take things for granted, to just look at the surface like this. If anything, Professor Olaniyan would have wanted is also to dig deeper. One of my goals is to visit, of course, I'll be going to Angola in the coming months or next year to continue some of this work, but also to go to Britain to see their correspondences, the archives on some of these visits, to really see the correlation between the empire and some of the work that Diana did. And of course, within the frame of the global Cold War, to get a better picture. But absolutely, from the cultural materials I've studied, British newspaper, headlines, there is that interest in Sandra because she made Diana weep. So another one put it, the girl on Diana got there about tree. Very ridiculous headlines, I must say. I should have actually added them on this, but yeah. So definitely is one of the things I'm thinking about, and I will look for a way. Probably when we have more time, I'll probably reach back to you to thicken that side of the argument. But I also don't want to have 4 papers in one, so that the attention wouldn't be all over. So that's the first thing. Rejoice, thank you very much for the question you asked on pageantry and exploitative, or what one, in fact, I call a kind of exotic imaging of, selling images there. And the way I'm thinking about it as in relation to what I'm thinking about as a cultural biography, it did not start now. You can go back to Sarah Bachman and the exposure of the body, the exotic body. So there's that exoticization of African bodies in different ways. Apart from Sarah Bachman, there have been other histories of thinking about this presentation of bodies. When I presented a version of this paper at the ALA, I had many comments that made me go back. So to really think about the specifics of the argument. Then I remember I started with doing an inventory of the post-colonial bodies, and I said the exploited bodies, and these are still things I'm thinking about, but this is a more granular approach to really thinking about it from the perspective of Angola. So definitely, you're very right about the question of the exploitative tendency. And to complicate that question, the person who actually organized this pageantry, and I'll finish now, is actually Norwegian. So many cases, we was called into questions for some of this. And even there's a documentary about it, and it's under a paywall. So these are some of the capitalist tendencies that are written from this perspective. So let me leave it at that. Thank you very much.
I see Prof. Dunmade is carrying on mentoring you in the questions. I recommend you take a screenshot because the video will not contain the comments. And for you also, Theophilus, screenshot those excellent questions. They will be useful to have a record of. Please, Shinaza, it's your turn to respond.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Samuel. That's a brilliant question. I know that one of the things that people often talk about is, like how genuine, like when you look at things that you see on the internet, you're always thinking about, does this represent reality? And in some ways, and again, the whole idea reading the protests, I wanted to see like those moments of, like if you're looking at the ways in which a protest can actually perform, like the power of the downtrodden, like you use that performance to the position openly as to perform that the most will be the queer lives matter part of it, because in some ways you actually need the internet, perhaps in ways that the other protesters would not, because that space is not where they can prevail. Nigeria is hostile, right, and is violent toward that kind of expression, and so they realize that for them to be visible, they'll have to take the internet. They'll have to take up the social media space. So in some ways, some of those images might be staged in quotes. It could be that the protesters will be more interested in capturing some of those instances and making them visible online, because that will be the only way that the world knows what's happening. And so one of the things that I think are powerful about the image that I open with, the short video that I open with, It is just how that particular, the circulation of it became what's, like the more important aspect of it, because that is, like I said before, that was what was shared multiple times. I know that to this day, it's still online and people continue to go back to it. So it continues. It's almost as if the process is being replayed. But again, people are not necessarily thinking about how true to life, the thing that you see there is. You are asking, how did this make it to the internet? And I'm actually reminded of how during the civil rights movement, I think Black activists would sometimes, like get on the bus and sit where they are not supposed to sit. They are trying to create a crisis so that they will then, that the world would then notice it. And sometimes they make it to the news. And it's only when you create that crisis, it's not just about what will happen there at the time. It's about the kind of repercussions that will follow. And part of that is also, like being in the news and being, on newspapers and in our world, there is the internet, there is the social media. So there is a very good question, Samuel, and thank you for asking.
Thank you very much for that, Chinaza. There have been a number of presentations on NSARS. And so what I want is to have the ability to edit and to put all the NSARS papers together in a panel now. If only Zoom was clever enough to be able to do that, because that would be a different conversation again, wouldn't it? And then another panel I want to edit is people who've spoken on the border between the online and the offline, or the online and the street. Can I ask, is that Temi Tayo? Was that someone different?
Sorry, hello. Ma, I have allowed Professor Femi. I promoted him to the panelist, so he should
thank you.
Unmute himself and speak.
That's very kind. Thank you very much, HQ. That's brilliant. So you are welcome, Prof. Whenever you want to be on the screen with your students, please make yourself visible and audible.
Thank you very much.
You have to enable.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Can you please enable your video so I can take a screenshot of this, please? Thank you.
Do I have the floor?
Yes, your video, please. You need to put your video on.
Can you give me my video?
Yes, I need to take a screenshot of this. This is profound.
We're taking a photograph. Shall I go away?
Okay.
No, please just.
Shall I stay? Okay.
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yes, sometimes one didn't know someone was going to photograph you.
To Michelle. Come over.
So you participants also, while we wait for Prof to come on screen, if you have comments or questions to each other, or if anyone in the audience wants to ask something more.
I get it.
I actually do have
please go ahead.
Comment, but I think it's also a question. So Kali, to the point that you had made earlier in Theophilus's presentation about what is happening in the moment where Harry returns to the scene of her mother's attempt at intervention, with the history of what subsequently happened to her mother. So Theophilus was mentioning this idea of, context that emerged from crisis, had their own kind of moment of crisis, and have this, I really love the idea of timestamps. Speak to what happens at this moment when the empire, or at least certain elements from it, return to the scenes of their of crises that were of their making, and then see themselves written into those sins in unexpected ways. So there's a certain brokenness to the body of the girl that Diana met. But Harry's returning to this scene with the knowledge that his own mother had in, a subsequent time become also, at least if it was to follow the narrative of her death, also a victim. So it's almost this cyclical, attempts to have time. So time is not progressing in this forward linear, but provide this moment where you come back and reread an initial scene quite differently. So I was wondering whether you could speak more about that, how that offers us the opportunity for moments of, I don't know what the word empathy or understanding, or even, well, whatever the English would be, but that attempts to see how the action that initially might have been observed as an objective distance practice has the person now, incorporated in it, and then utterly nuances the question so differently. There's a point that was made in the chat. I'll say this, and I would end out the kind of voyeuristic relationship that is on this. And yes, that's of oh, look at what's happening over there. So there's always the distance. Look at, oh, this is what happens over there. And I think that's what we're trying to collectively challenge in this panel. Is this actually what happens over there? What would this over there look like if you were on the scene? What alternative meanings will emerge from this context, apart from just the debilitating, this is what always happens, that this is the index of crisis, as Mbembe has mentioned it. So I was just wondering, I feel something is happening there that provides moments of empathetic understanding that can be narrated differently, that I feel might be useful. But yeah.
Theophilus, before you respond, can I piggyback on that question? And my question takes your terminology of the date stamp. Is that the term you use, the date stamp?
Timestamp.
But it's being the timestamp, but it's the young woman's timestamp. So the young woman and Diana have the same timestamp in that moment. But then when the son comes back, he steals that date stamp, and it becomes about his healing and his loss. And the young woman becomes, I'm sure you can say it better. Please, Theophilus, go ahead.
Okay, let me start with you now. And to be very honest, I'm not sure I can answer the question which he asked fully. And to just give you an idea, let me start with just something that happened just yesterday night. So my wife asked me to talk her through my presentation. So I told her, and I showed her my PowerPoint. And when she saw Princess Diana, she was excited and all of that. And I said, but do you know what's going on in that image? And when I explained, you know what she said? She said, don't spoil Princess Diana for me. Now, it seems simple, but it gets back to what you're saying, because she has this image of this, advocacy and all of those things. And I think for the first time, it actually struck me that I've not been thinking almost correctly. I'm not thinking enough about that image, because what she said, now, she's not in the academia, she doesn't know all of these things. It was when I explained. And her first reaction is, don't spoil Princess Diana for me. But I'm almost very sure that if I proceed with this kind of argument, there will also be arguments that go in line with what you just said. That, of course, although Princess Diana also had these issues with, how do you confront that? And that's the moment of empathy. I'm thinking about that. And I'm not shy to say, sincerely, since she said it yesterday night, I actually thought about it even while I was sleeping, while I woke up this morning, that actually that is true. How do you think about our involvement and all of that in relation to the problem? So that is very spot on. And Kali, again, as I said, it becomes Prince Harry's time. Actually, in that same 2019, they went to open an orthopedic center in the name of Princess Diana, which was one of the reasons Prince Harry goes to Angola. Now, these are political undertones to many of these cultural productions that we'll continue to see and will continue to wrestle with. My goal, really, and not just in this work, but what I think is my intellectual, what I think I'm gearing toward is to do a kind of political theorizing with popular culture. And that is why all of this, I plan again to visit the orthopedic center and all of those places to really understand the context on the ground. Because it's easy for me to sit down from somewhere in North America to pontificate. But again, Kali, to walk the street, when I walk the street, what kind of things would I observe differently? How, for example, does Sandra think through these things? Now, it doesn't mean that I have to take what Sandra says, right? There's still that critical edge to use to think about it. But the concept of the timestamp in relation to crisis, these are significant for me, and not just in relation to even that image alone. There are other things within Angola I'm dealing with. You realize I'm talking about generational disability. That's the Angolan part. I'm also thinking about Nigeria, precisely the leprosy colony in, for example, Nigeria. There are histories of the leprosy colony in Nigeria. There are also timestamps on some of these things, which is really, and I'm not answering your questions. It's just to show that I'm actually thinking, because the more I engage them, the more complex I realize these things become. They become thickened. The place I'm working with in Nigeria is also the relationship between one of the people, the famous leprosy victim, and he had a relationship with this British missionary who taught him how to write music and all of that. So in my consideration is to think through his music, to think through that, to think through all of this in thinking about the post-colonial incredible from the colonial perspective, and all of that. So timestamps and ruptures. But the last thing I will say is ruptures do not just even occur at the moment of that grand crisis at the Civil War. Ruptures continue to occur. And how the ruptures continue to occur and reoccur again has a significance on the body. And that is what I want to continue to think about. Sorry if I didn't answer your question, but it's just to tell you that these are things that really they're still bothering me, and I'm still early into the process of the work. But there are things.
And something that I'm very insistent on is that question time is not an interrogation. It's an opportunity to think alongside other people. HQ, I see Prof. Dunmade is back. Shall we try and get him back on the screen? Chinaza, do you want to say something, please?
Oh, no. I mean, except to say that I'm like in these presentations, and I'm seeing how all of these are, actually connected. When you talk about the images and how, that actually goes back to what Samuel was saying. When you think of the intent, you're asking why did they create the image? What did they want to, communicate? That they are kind, that they are, empathetic, or are they actually trying to achieve something to, make their situation better? So if we constantly think of, like the intent, what did they set out to achieve, like when they decided to put out this image? So yes, and also back to Theophilus when he said, my wife you've spoiled the image, spoiled the princess, right? So, and I'm thinking of the image that she has in her mind of who Princess Diana was. And again, it's that idea that it's artificial, it's an image, and it all really comes together. Thank you.
And then Chinaza, for you, the images are also the fella, the protester, those echoes. Something is being reenacted there as well. There's so many reenactments, resurrections of fella, in particular of that image. And there's something similar going on. It's not that empathetic empire, but it's something else.
Yes.
Prof. Dunmade, do you want to be with us? Yes, please. Please, sir, do you want to say something?
It's nice to be here. It's nice to be here. I've been having some technical issues. Yes.
Thank you, sir. And do you want to switch on your camera so that we can take a group photograph while you're not here?
I have done one or two papers on chronicles, and I'll pass them across to you soonest. They are still works in progress. So I enjoyed this. Yes, we've been having some technical problem with the face is not coming up. I don't know why. He wants to see my face, but allowed to engage so always try.
That's all right. Thank you, sir. We may have to take a picture just of your name then. Like we are standing at the door of your office, knocking, asking to come in.
Kali, if I may, I want to ask you a question, and it's not a question; it's just something that I'm trying to think.
I don't know what the problem is.
Don't worry, sir. Uti will say wahala is like bicycle.
I'm sorry, the video.
No problem. Thank you for being here. Uti, please carry on.
Yes, so I'm wondering, so it appears we're trying to evolve here in this panel and in other related conversations, a typology of crisis that is very specific to African context. And I'm wondering, thinking about what Nazar was saying, is there something about the structure of crisis that is oddly democratic in its potential to allow these moments of interruption that driver's seat can co-opt and enact their own agenda in very specific ways? So if is that what we're saying? Because if we go back to look at the Diana scene, or look at the scene Nazar's looking at in his presentation, and then the moments that I read in Soyinka's novel, it appears that there is a certain elasticity to the moment of crisis that enables actors that would have been heated to, excluded, to be able to say, oh, okay, stuff is happening here. Let me see how to, the word fails me, how to co-opt this moment and enact my own agenda. Is that how we're reading crisis here? Again, I'm also aware that we're thinking about crisis beyond just the moment. We're thinking about this inscription on bodies, on landscapes, on peoples. But is there that democratic impulse almost that this context of crisis enable? If so, how would you say it works, and how would it nuance our conversations around it? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, just very quickly, because I see we're out of time, is warning us, I think. So the point is, yes, just one aspect of it, and I think that there is more, but as you say this, I'm thinking of how just their idea that there's a protest allows a lot of people to come on, and also how, sometimes you see policemen, they have to, like stand by and watch because they know that this is something. Okay, so yes, that moment allows for things that would not otherwise have been allowed to actually come out, come on, and for people to see that and know that this is for the moment. So I think that crisis enables, like mass participation, and in ways that other kinds of events would not normally allow. That would be just one aspect, but I know there is more that we can get out of that idea.
I know this conversation will continue, and I just wanted to say again what a dream panel this is. PhD students putting a panel together by themselves, a proud elder arriving in the audience, coming to admire and take pleasure, and lots of your peers in the audience. I've just loved this. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your panel. I've really loved it, and I look forward to hearing how your work evolves. And see you next year, same place, same time, same place, date stamp. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for a wonderful panel.
Great session.
Thank you, Samuel in HQ.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Nice glasses.